Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eirik, welcome to my studio and to my YouTube channel. This week there's been a lot going on here in Italy. Now, if you read the news, I'm sure you caught some of it. I'm not going to get into it here. But because of all this and all that's going on, this week's episode is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be an excerpt from episode 3 of my Patreon exclusive series, which is the Contours Part 1 episode. In this excerpt, we'll go over 3 easy to follow rules that I use and stick to diligently while blocking in my figure. And I use them to great effect, and you can too, and it's very, very simple. Now, the full video is available to my patrons who support me with $5 or more, and the full-length video is over 40 minutes long and full of valuable information. To see the full episode, you have to go on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Eirik Arnesen. There's a link in the description below. You have to be a Patreon supporter of $5 or more in order to see the videos. Once you've become a supporter, you will instantly have access to all the videos. You will find the videos by clicking the post button here. The videos should appear if you have pledged $5 or more. And you can refine your search at the top of the page here. For now, however, sit back, relax, enjoy some royalty-free music, and me rambling on about 3 important rules that I pay close attention to while blocking in my sculpture. This brings us finally to the meat of this episode, the 3 simple rules I use when building my contours in order to maintain control. These will seem too simple to be true. They are not necessarily difficult to understand, but they're a little difficult to implement as they require a lot of attention throughout the entire sculpting process. Okay, rule number 1. Equal widths on either side of the center line. This rule obviously only applies to the front and the back view as there is no visible center line from the side views, and we'll talk about the side views later. To begin with, this rule seems simple enough. On either side of the center line, we need equal amount of clay. If you build up one side, you should build on the other right away in order to maintain symmetry and never end up in a situation where you have to fix asymmetry. Fixing asymmetry is much harder than maintaining symmetry. You'll see me doing this constantly throughout the video. I will work on one side and then the same area on the other side right away. There are some reasons for this, which we'll come back to in rule number 2. You might be surprised to know that not only is it good to work maintaining symmetry and working both sides at the same time as you go, but the end result, the finished sculpture, will have the same symmetry on either side of the center line in most areas. In other words, this is not only a trick to use when building up your sculpture, it is where you should aim to have the piece end as well, with symmetry and widths on either side of the center line. A very important thing to mention is that because this rule is dependent on our center line, it only functions if we travel 90 degrees perpendicular to our center line across the body. So if the center line is slightly tilted, we cannot travel across the body horizontally and look for symmetry. We need to draw a line from one side, 90 degrees, to our center line across to the other side. This also means that when we work on our contours around the box, we need to use the center line that runs through the box. And if we are working on the contours of the rib cage, we need to use the center line running through the rib cage. We can only use the center line running through the bony mass that's underneath the contours we are working on. So now you can probably begin to see where I could potentially run into issues if my center line begins to move, as I rely on it to decide whether I have symmetry on either side. If it moves, what once was symmetry will become asymmetry. And perhaps the issue is not actually asymmetry, but a center line that is not in the center. So if I keep my center line clear all the time, I'll know that any asymmetry is not because my center line is misplaced, but because I've misplaced clay on my contours.
If I lose my centerline and end up redrawing it and then run into symmetry issues, then who knows what the issue really is? And finding a solution then becomes much harder because you don't know what the issue really is. There are of course exceptions to every rule. Number one is the rule only works from the views where we do have a centerline, which means the rule only works from the front and the back. Number two is if we have a pose where the ribcage and pelvis are twisted on top of each other, then we need to observe from two separate views to decide whether we have symmetry on either side of our centerline or not. We have to observe from head on all the time. If we have a twisting pose and we are facing the pelvis square, then we cannot make decisions about symmetry on the ribcage. Number three is that this rule really only works in the areas where we have major bony masses. In our case, that would be the pelvis and the ribcage. It does not apply to the legs, and it doesn't apply to the area in between the pelvis and the ribcage either. Though I think you'll find that this small area rarely will diverge too much from this rule. Rule number 2. Symmetry in angle breaks. This one also seems too good to be true, but you'll be surprised how well this works. This also only works from the front and the back. If you find an angle break on one side of the body, you should immediately look 90 degrees across perpendicular to your centerline, and you'll find a similar angle break. Just like the first rule, this only works with the centerline traveling through the bony mass, either the pelvis or the ribcage, that you are applying the contours to. So how and why does this work? It works because on most people, a large majority actually, the muscles are attached on the same side on either side of the body. So the muscles that are attached to the pelvis will be attached in the same place on both sides, leading to very similar height for each angle break. The angle breaks will not necessarily have the same angle. The severity of the angle can vary, but their height tends to be symmetrical on either side, 90 degrees perpendicular to the centerline. Now, does this always work? No, there are cases when arms are stretched upwards and an extreme pose, for example, where things perhaps don't line up perfectly because the muscles on one side are stretched thin, while on the other side they are full. But it will be closer than you think, and applying this rule in the beginning will give you a very structurally sound starting point. If you do not apply this principle, the figure will often tend to look very soft and spaghetti-like. This can be subtle sometimes, but a trained eye will always spot it, and someone without training will notice which sculpture is better if one with this principle applied and one without is placed next to each other. It's easy to see. This doesn't mean that if you haven't thought about this, your sculpture is necessarily bad. Perhaps you are applying this principle without even knowing that you are. But I think it's worth to be aware and awake, so you can be in control of your process and fix any eventual mistakes that might come. Rule number 3. Symmetry in internal information. Now, we are still working on our contours here, and we'll get back to this rule in a later episode on internal information, but I think it's valuable to mention it here because it is something that I am anticipating and working towards at this stage already. As my contours grow, I do end up with the space needed for my internal information. Remember how I earlier in the video described how contours move in space? Contours from one view will very often become, actually always become, internal information from the next view. In other words, I'm already placing some of my internal information as I build contours. We'll get back to this point once this rule is described a little bit further. Symmetry in internal information is something to keep in mind the second you start placing clay in between your contours. Look for it and you'll find it in more places than not. To begin with, this seems like it will end up with us having a figure resembling a Greek statue, and this is potentially true, but on top of this very symmetrical and structurally sound foundation, we can vary transitions between forms on either side of our center line in order to create a much more organic looking finished product. This will be further explained in the soon-to-come episodes on internal information and modeling transition. But for now, it's a good rule to be aware of and to stick with.
If you enjoyed the video and want to learn sculpture from me, check out my Patreon page. I give feedback and critiques on people's work, and we can talk about whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. There's also exclusive sculpting video content on my Patreon, and the first series we are embarking on, which you just watched an excerpt of, is the Beginner's Guide to Figure Sculpture. I'm super excited to finally be creating exclusive content for Patreon, and I hope you will be too and will take a look. The link to my Patreon is in the description below. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.